Namaste. In the third stanza of chapter 5, Krishna says, O mighty armed Arjuna, only that person deserves consideration as a true renunciate who finds freedom from entanglement easy, having no likes or dislikes and no attachment to duality. This is a very important stanza because many people think of right living as a suffering. They groan under the weight of all the things they have to give up. You know, if there's the least fear in your mind that you may not yet have overcome a particular delusion, you have still that delusion to overcome. If there's the least difficulty in overcoming it, you have not reached that complete freedom. It is not enough to punish yourself, and this is why the old-fashioned practice, at least in the West, of flagellating yourself and so on, it's not a wholesome practice. It doesn't bring you that. If you don't feel pain in the delusion you're trying to overcome, you feel pain in your body. That's not the way. The path to God should be joyous. And don't make yourself feel that you've got you've got to do penance all the time. This is not so much penance. You know, the word repent comes from the Latin to creep back. Repentire, I think it is, but I'm not sure. To creep back. In other words, you're stuck in this boiling pot of delusion or maya or whatever it is, this swamp of difficulties. You have to creep back to the infinite. And don't punish yourself for being there. What's the use of doing that? You're in there already. You're not going to get less out of there for reading it. You have to know that that is an attraction for you. Every delusion has its own magnetism, and it's the magnetism you must overcome. It isn't going to be helpful for you to feel that you're making yourself miserable on this path to bliss. God is not pleased with that. He's pleased with your offering of your own love and your own joy. So learn to be joyful in what you give up. Really, when you become free from any delusion that may be, what happens is suddenly you realize it didn't matter to you. You don't want it. There's no difficulty in it. As long as there is difficulty, there you won't be able to get there. So let me stress this again and again. The path to God should be a path of joy. And it is true, there was an interesting thing that a sadhu voiced as in teaching to other people. Don't do what you like, and then you will do as you like. Well, as long as you're doing what you like, that means you're following your path of desires, you won't be free. Well, the thing is that I know that Henry David Thoreau in his essay, Civil Disobedience, he said, if you see something wrong in this world, then you have to fight it. It's your duty to fight it. Get rid of it. Okay, one wrong. 1,000,000 wrongs? Can you really overcome 1,000,000 wrongs? He's not being practical in that teaching. You have to fight those battles that are closest to hand. If I am needing food, I have to eat here. But if the people on the other side of the world are needing food, it's their problem. You can't help everybody. If you make it your duty to help them, fine. But then go into it in a bigger way. But always you can only do one thing at a time. And if you're going to do it well, you have to do it with concentration. And so, as people try to meet their duties, they have to select which ones should you work on hardest. I would say, don't work on the little ones. This is the mind's way of sort of paying your dues without really getting poor, you might say. The mind tells you, well, this is easy to work on, I'll work on this first. Don't. Work on the difficult ones. What happens is that when the river is flowing strongly toward the ocean, even the eddies on the edge become sucked into that too. So if you devote your life to the little things, like that story of Ramakrishna's, where a lady was saying to her husband, my brother is wanting to renounce the world. And the husband said, well, what's he doing to prepare himself? Oh, he's giving up things one by one. And the husband said, he'll never renounce the world that way, don't worry about it. She said, well, what should he do? He said he should do this. He took off all his clothes except his copine. He said, from now on I view you and all women my mother, walked out the door and never came back. That was a pretty drastic thing, I must say, for that poor woman. But indeed, if you want to give up, don't think that you can give up these nibbling little things, these little desires like mice nibble at the edge. Get to the center of it. Work on the real things. The more mind you, what we're doing, we're living in a yuga now, Dwapara Yuga. It's a yuga of energy. And where there is energy, there is magnetism. When you send electric current through a wire, then you have a magnetic field around that. When you put energy into things, you realize that there is a magnetic field around it. And then gradually, as this yoga advances, people will understand more and more clearly that everything has its own magnetism. And so what you must work on is not so much avoiding the thing as avoiding the magnetism. Now, what directs that magnetism? Magnetism is directed by willpower. The greater the willpower, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. You have around your body an aura of light, and that aura of light will depend on the quality and the intensity of your energy. And most people's auras are fuzzy because they don't have any energy going in a single direction. Most people's energy cancels itself out because they want this thing, but they also want that thing, which cancels it. And that's why democracy is really, it's not a real system. It pretends to be. But in fact, most people, their voting cancels each other out. The days of Rama, the days of higher Treta Yuga, these are the beginning of an understanding of right action in this way. Rama was the king, but one person of true discrimination, better follow him than vote truth into existence. When I created Ananda, I simply would not let people just decide for themselves in a group forum. There were people who insisted on it. So I said, go ahead, have your meetings. You know, it took them 5 years to decide finally, to vote finally, to get rid of a dog that had strayed onto our land and remained there and was chasing the deer and chasing guests and becoming a general nuisance. But with all the talking pro and con and pro, it took them 5 years to reach any kind of decision. And there was a time when many of them, but fortunately not all, rebelled against me and saying that they didn't want me telling them what to do. I said, look, I am not interested in telling you what to do, but I am very tired of this 1 horsepower energy. And if I cannot do, when I feel something is should be done, if I cannot do that, then I'm leaving this place. I want nothing more to do with it. Well, I'm not stupid. I didn't say that until I knew I had enough people on my side to outvote them. But now Ananda is completely peaceful because it's not democratic, it's theocratic. And I think this is what will happen in the higher ages also. Those who have wisdom are much more qualified to decide what should be done than those who have no wisdom. And the only good thing about democracy is that sort of people vote this way and that way, and finally they cancel each other out. And a few outspoken people will bring people to the right path. But always remember that true guidance comes from above. It doesn't come from opinions. I know our neighbors one time are very upset because I was doing something that they didn't want. And I said, look, the group of them came to me, and I said, look, I am not interested in opinions. And they were very upset by this. I'm not even interested in my own opinion. I'm only interested in truth. Well, they fought that we wanted to create a clinic up there for everybody. And they insisted they wanted to do the clinic. Well, I said, go ahead and do yours and we'll do mine. Of course they didn't succeed. We have a thriving clinic there. There has to be some sort of guiding force in these things. Otherwise you will find that every community, any community that you try to form, and I have urged people to form them, especially for 2 reasons. One, that in this time of approaching financial disaster, having land in the country and living in the country, a simple life, growing your own food, living with other people, this will be a great help. The other side is that if you live with sattvic people, their influence can lift you. And if you're going through a hard time, as most people do at one time or another, the others can help uplift you. So we have found that these communities of Ananda on 3 continents of this world are having a tremendous impact everywhere. People see that, yes, it is possible to live together. But I have had to have this ideal that we have to be led by wisdom. We're not a democracy, we're a dharmocracy. We seek always to do the path of Dharma. And those who are more fit to know what Dharma is are more fit to decide what Dharma shall be. Dharma is not following the path of desire. It is following the path toward freedom and inner joy. So this is the system that I recommend to people, and this is the system that will bring you individually that freedom. Don't do things because you like them. Do them because they are right. But don't fight against your wrong tendencies and don't suffer in the process. If your action brings you pain, there's something wrong with it. The attitude is wrong, whatever it is. You must understand that right action will always lead to greater happiness. And if you find, for example, you're living in a monastery, but it's very difficult to overcome the desire for sex, well, what do? Don't give in to it, because giving in to a powerful desire like that will mean being sucked into it and sucked underwater and drowned. You must fight it. But on the other hand, if you can't do it without suffering all the time, then give up being a monk or a nun. It's much better to, as St. Paul said, it's better to, what did he say? Something that, better to, I forget what he said, something than burn. In other words, better to be married than to burn, that's what he said. So burn with desire, in other words. And burning is a good figure of speech too, because it's more than a figure of speech. Somebody who was in the monastery at Mount Washington left and became involved sexually, and when he came back, Master said, I felt this wave of heat coming from him, and he soon after that left. And one disciple who was out at the desert, and Master had his hand on him to help support himself as he walked, because he was just always in samadhi, and it was difficult for him to keep a straight line sometimes. Sometimes I had to catch him to keep him from falling. As he said, in so many bodies it's hard to remember which one I'm supposed to keep moving. But anyway, he had his hand on this disciple's arm, and then he said, hot, and he let go of him and took my arm. And that disciple, not long afterwards, fell into delusion and left the spiritual path. But it is better to, instead of burning, St. Paul was saying, don't follow a way that is going to bring you suffering. The right path to you will give you freedom. And so when you are seeking God and your conscience tells you should do this or that, if it's too difficult, don't. I remember I asked my guru one time for his blessings to help me to overcome liking for good food. And he just sort of laughed indulgently. And he said, don't worry about those little things. When ecstasy comes, everything goes. I read in a book of some lady who was very much attached to Indian teachings, although she was English, and she talked so sternly about not drinking tea. My thinking is that if you make all that effort not to do little things, first of all, as I said, it's an excuse to avoid the big things, but basically you're just wasting energy thinking about not doing this, not doing that. Just the main thing that you need to do on the spiritual path is love God. The next thing you need to do is have that thought of Him constantly in your mind. The third thing you need to do is in your meditation, give yourself up to Him. Say, God, I only want your will. I don't want anything else. And try, under the trials of earth, of this life, the difficulties and the successes and whatever they might be, try always to give them to God and to say that This is your body, this is your life. I'm only trying to live for you and with you. As I've used the illustration many times, when I go to the dentist, and I've had to go to the dentist a great deal in my life, because when I was a child I got colitis and they forbade me to drink any milk or have cheese or any dairy products, which resulted in low calcium in my teeth. Well, I've had that experience many times in this life, so for me it's been sort of a frequent check-in, you might say. But I have found that sitting in the dentist chair, it's a good thing. Practice these things to practice titiksha. I've said that before, endurance. Practicing that titiksha, endurance, you find that sitting there, for example, in the dentist chair, he will give you a certain amount of pain. Refuse to give in to it. Now, I wouldn't do this if it caused me too much pain, because that wouldn't be helpful to me. I remember one time when I was young on the path, I decided to practice titiksha by taking only a cold shower. Well, I know that many Indians are used to cold baths because that's all the kind of water they have, but I was used to a warm shower. And when I took a cold shower in winter, suddenly it broke through my willpower, and I was shivering, and I didn't get warm again for 6 months. Well, I went too far. Do it bit by bit. Stokum anikoda. Just bit by bit, and you will find that you become free. But always do it in the direction of joy. I remember we used to sit out in the back of the truck, the pickup truck that took us to church. We took our shirts off in midwinter and then try to, with titiksha, bear that cold. Practice these little things. Little things will help you to grow spiritually. Joy to you.